would like to call our regular Board of Education meeting to order. Before we get started this evening, I just want to take a moment to recognize two individuals, longtime Richmond Community Schools employees who passed away last week or so. Marlene Derby, who was a longtime custodian at the hospital, at the high school, and loved this building, loved our students. And Mr. Pat Whiteman, who was a longtime teacher here at Richmond High School. Personal note, probably my most favorite teacher ever that I had. But let's keep them and their families in our thoughts and prayers over the next days and weeks to come. Okay, this evening we have with us three fabulous individuals from the Lee School Elementary who are going to come up and do the pledge for us. So if they would come up and I will introduce them. Okay, we have the president of the Student Council, Jacob Hill. He is from Miss Walter's classroom. The vice president is Nathan Fraley, and he's in Mrs. Worth's classroom. And we have the treasurer, Sophia Jackson, from Mrs. Krieger's room. So we are very pleased to have them lead the pledge tonight, and they are also going to be our True Blue moment in a few minutes. So at this time, if we could all please rise for the pledge. Whenever you're ready, we're ready. Pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good job. And we'll see you guys back up here in just a couple minutes, okay? Okay, next is our mission statement.
At Richmond Community Schools, we provide a quality education that empowers students to be successful in a global community. Do roll call. Chris? Here. Kyle?
Here.
Ryan?
Here.
Tracy? Here. David?
Here.
Margaret?
Here.
And I am here. We have 4.
Excellent, thank you. Next motion would be in order to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Support. Is that Chris?
Yes.
It has been moved and supported. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, a motion to approve the consent agenda items.
So moved.
Support.
It has been moved and supported. Any discussion, Brian?
Yes, I'd like to recognize those individuals that have either retired or resigned. Mrs. Bevins, our food service director, recently took a position at Genesee County ISD as the countywide food service director. I wish her only the best. She's a wonderful lead in our district to move us forward. Longtime network and computer technician Eric Lamont is resigning. He also received a promotion in another district. So I only wish him the best because there's a lot of chance for movement in that other district. I also, since our last board meeting, Aaron Lashbrook, teacher at the middle school, resigned. Aaron chose to go into a field outside of education, so I wish him only the best. Daylin Rajewski, our 9th grade girls basketball coach, also resigned. And upcoming, we'll have a replacement for that coach. She's done wonders building that team with the varsity coach, Jody Schroeder, et cetera. And then Taylor Heisen, one of our child care employees, also resigned. And we have recently filled that with an internal candidate that accepted. Some of the new hires you'll see a couple of them with regarding the production. Those are within what was typically done with the AUD. They are now district employees, so it's within that allocated dollar amount that we budgeted. The only difference on the one, Daniel Sequence, the text crew, we receive revenue for when we rent the facility for shows and so forth, so that rental pays his salary, so it's almost a one-to-one wash on those two. But we do have a replacement art teacher who's here tonight, Leah Gagner? Kagner, all right, apologize. She is the new high school art teacher, so we're glad to have Leah as part of our team. She has hit the ground running. She's done nothing but wonderful things in the classroom. Stopped over a couple times in her classroom, and it's like she's been there all year, so welcome.
Excellent, welcome.
I do have some questions that came in on the claims and accounts, some of the bills. Check number 46164 to Printall. This was for flyers that the Lee PTO they're putting on a PTO Mom Prom event. So the money that was raised by the PTO is paying for those that have checked for Printall. Same thing with Central Paper, which is check number 46189. That also covers the cost of the paper for the Lee PTO. Check number 46242 to Ann Durst, and check number 46243 to Anthony Gillespie. These are reimbursements from the allocation that the PTO gave teachers at Lee Elementary School from the internal account. Check number 46182 was a wage garnishment for an employee that we had to garnish wages, so that was what that check was for. Check number 46184 to Curb Appeal was for the signs for the chamber, which will be reimbursed by the chamber for that dollar amount for those signs. Check number 46192 and check number 46193 for Science Olympia. These are for registration. These are typically have been paid out of the internal accounts. It's a science internal account that pays for those type of registrations. We don't have a specific line item for general fund other than when they hit the state competition. Then we start paying state and national competitions. Check number 46222 was for the scoreboard. Invoice has been issued to the City of Richmond, so we'll be looking for the reimbursement on that aspect. We have not yet received that revenue yet. Check number 46304 was for College Week this year. The high school did something a little different. They've been promoting College Week. And they did each day focusing on getting kids to apply for colleges as well as competitions or prizes for those that have applied. So the reimbursement was for some of the prizes that were given to students once they submitted. You can see on some of the lockers, you'll see a sign that says I applied to in the college name. So it was a way of promoting colleges and get the awareness out there. Each week there was a different focus. Staff talked to students about what decisions they made in choosing a college and so forth. So those were for the reimbursements. And then check number 46306 is for solo ensemble. There's an internal and a general fund, a student activities account and a general fund account. This is for high school and middle school, and it's really up to the discretion of the teacher whether they want to use the general fund or their internal account. In this case, they chose the internal account, but they do have a general fund that supports the music program at the high school level. Those were all the questions that I received on the claims and accounts.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next is our True Blue Moment, portion of our meeting that we take to showcase some great things that are happening within our district. And as I said earlier, we have members from our Will Lee Student Council, and so they are going to come back up to the podium here, and they have a little presentation for us.
First, I'd like to thank Ms. Vanek and Mrs. Van Sledrijk, who are the Student Council co-sponsors, who are unable to be here, but they do a lot of work throughout the course of the entire school year, also help with these presentations. So this time, I'm going to turn it over to the students. Students, if you could just please introduce yourself one more time before you say your section.
My name is Nathan. Student Council has a year full of activities. Our first meeting is just an introduction to the Student Council and what it means to be a Student Council representative. When we meet in October, we hold our elections for President, Vice President, Secretariat, and Treasurer. In November, we are preparing for our December activities. We work closely with Mrs. Cleveland and Cindy's kids to collect new items like Barbies, Hot Wheels cars, books, art sets, and footballs. These items are then given to families in need in our school community for Christmas. In December, we also hold our annual fundraiser. For the last 2 years, we have been selling stencils or smaller pencils. Last year, we sold over 1,000 stencils, and we hope to have the same sales this year. Students can purchase the stencil for themselves, friends, or family members in our school, and they are delivered the week after our sales.
My name's Jacob. Student Council has a year. In January, we create Valentines for veterans. These Valentines are sent to veterans at John Dingell Veterans Hospital in Detroit. In February, we make projects for the residents at Meadow Lodge. We have made hanging decoration, pots of plants, sun catchers, and lots of other projects to donate to the residents. This year, we're hoping to try a new project in March. Working with the art teacher at Lee, we're hoping to create a Kindness Rocks project. Students would paint a positive, fun design on a rock. These rocks would be placed in a garden on school grounds. Students could continue to add to the rock garden on their own or take one of the rocks when they need a reason to smile or laugh. We're excited to try this because it's a way to get everyone in the school involved, and it can give students a reason to smile. In April, we work on teacher appreciation projects. In the past, we've made cards, decorated plates, which became breakfast invitations, packaged markers, stickers of popcorn for teachers, and many other activities. In May, we wrap up our year with a celebration of all our hard work and dedication. As you can see, we have a pretty busy year planned.
Hi, my name is Sophia. September, introductions, first meeting. October, officer elections. November, create posters. Advertising for our December activities. December, stencil sale, Sandy's cake collection. January, Valentine's for vets. February, projects for my lodge. March, kindness rock projects. April, teacher appreciation project. May, end of the year celebration.
Now I know the students really wanted me to ask this. Are there any questions?
No questions, but you guys said you were going to do a fabulous job, and you were right. You did a great job. I like Sophia shaking her head, saying, yes, I did. That's beautiful. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our presentations. Pyro Joe's Homecoming Fireworks, Brian?
For the last couple of years, we as a community have been actually blessed to have this donation given to the district by Pyro Joe's and Mike and Mary Ellen Tautman regarding the fireworks show after a homecoming game. And I thought it was only appropriate that as a board and a school district we are recognized, because this is one of the events that truly brings our community together, and it's something that a lot of our community members look forward to. I have a little version of this last fireworks show. I hope it can cross our fingers here. Let's see. Maybe not. I actually pulled this from someone's Facebook post. So there's a lot of teams, a lot of visitors who come to our city that are just very impressed with the community atmosphere and the fireworks show. And you can tell by this show, this is not just a few fireworks. This was an unbelievable show. So I want to personally thank them on behalf of the school district and the board for their donation to this fireworks show and everything they do for the community. So please accept this and thank you very much.
I'd just say we really enjoy it, and thank Brian for allowing us to do it. You could have said no, but he said yes, and it allows us to do things. And we can. It's a nice format. It's a nice way we can do some creative things, and every year I think it gets a little better. And we buy product now for it for next year. I'm already buying stuff for. Hey, that would look good there, and I'm already purchasing it. So we look forward to it. But thank you.
I think the board thinks more.
How are you doing?
Again, thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right. I do have to say this, the first time that Mike approached me on this, I think it was like my first year here, and I was a little nervous. And I said, well, how big are these fireworks? He said, I was very impressed. So we put all the safety precautions, and that's one thing I can say with certainty. They really look out for the safety of the visitors there, roping the area off and making sure everybody's safe and able to enjoy a phenomenal show. So again, thank you very much. Okay. All right, this one. If you had an opportunity to, if you are on Facebook, you might have seen some of the pictures for this. The gallery of graduates that has been donated by the Historical Society. So at this time, I would like to ask Christine Raleigh and Mary Ellen Shepard Logan to come on up here. They are two members of the Richmond Historical Society and Historical and Genealogical Society. And this project started well before my tenure in Richmond Community Schools. And I cannot imagine us not having something like this for the historical value of our district. I put together just some pictures that we took. There's the members of the Historical Society, and they are a wonderful group of men and women who are really looking to preserve the historical nature of our community. This started with, there was an article, this is just from The Voice in April of 2015, talking about what their charge was and what they were trying to do. This is them actually unloading it off the trailer 2 weeks ago.
That's right.
2 weeks ago.
A week ago Saturday.
Yeah, a week ago. And never in my wildest, I saw the drawings, I saw kind of the schematics of what it was going to look like. Never thought it was going to be like this. It's just unbelievable. What's interesting about it is it really starts, there's a picture of what it looks like, and it's in the lobby of the auditorium for every community member to see. And this past weekend at the play, it was wonderful to see community members, students, everybody just flipping through, looking at the pictures, finding where mom and dad were, grandma and grandpas. One of them, someone has 4 generations?
I think many people probably here
Three,
do too.
4 generations in it. So it was just hearing the stories about it and creating those conversations. The very first one shows the class of 1896 in Richmond. And it shows pictures of what the old high school looked like. And then you can see, there's a picture of the 1896 class of, back when local school boards controlled local public education. So this is like political notes. So. You'll see many of the class composites from beginning in 1925 and going through. These are just a sample of a few of them. And it's just a wonderful piece to add to the Richmond Community Schools and for our community to be able to have and preserve. And so I want to thank them personally on behalf of the school district as well as the board for preserving this. This is an article that just was featured on November 5th regarding the outcome of this project. And without them, this couldn't have happened from a district. So I want to thank the Richmond Area Historical Society and Genealogical Society. Thank you very much for everything. Thank you.
Well, this was a really fun project to do. Actually, it started in 2012 when I someone had asked me if I could find a picture of their grandmother, and this person lived out of state. So I said, sure, I can just go over to the school because I know that kiosk is in the lobby because it was there in a while ago so I came over here and it wasn't there. So I did a little bit of research and I found that the kiosk had broken and the pictures were they were in a room just because there was no place else to put them, and they were. I just thought, well, we really need to save these and do something about it. So Mary Ellen and I came over with the station wagon and loaded the pictures in there, and we've kept them at the museum, safe and secure in a clean environment. And we've had them there for 5 years while we raised money, drew up the design, created the display case, and had it made. So it's been 5 years in the making, and we're really proud that it's here. We feel it's a very important part of Richmond's history, and we thank you for working together with us on that.
Thank you.
Are you?
Thank you for all the hard work.
Really?
Good. How are you, Kyle? I'm part of the board here.
And the countless hours they putting some of fixing some of the pictures and creating some composites. They talked about the actual building of it took about 300 man-hours just to build the display case. So again, I can't thank you enough. So it will be well treasured in this district, and I can't wait for the upcoming holiday programs for all the community to see. Thank you.
Because it really, that picture doesn't do it justice. It's absolutely beautiful. It really is in person. Thank you very much. Okay, next is the overnight field trip to Washington, D.C.
I'm back again. It's that time. Every 2 years, I take a group of kids to Washington, D.C. As I just mentioned, Ms. Miller, she was on our maiden voyage back in 2007 when we first started this. So, and it's ebbed and flowed. This year we have a very big group. We've got 25 people who want to go, 9 parents. So it's getting, so I almost get more parents than kids sometimes, so I'm not quite sure what that says. But nonetheless, we've got quite a few. So our plan is to leave in May 8th, bright and early. We have a 6:30 flight out of Metro booked for us. We'll be back on the 11th about 8 o'clock at night. Okay, that's our plan. As far as the itinerary, the exact itinerary is very fluid because as you're probably aware, the way things work in Washington is nothing can be officially done until we get started in February. So we have this wonderful plan to visit the White House, Congress, the Supreme Court, Holocaust Museum, all of those things. And the great thing about it this time is we've got a verbal commitment from both the Supreme Court and our Senator, drawing a blank, Senator Stabenow, to meet with the kids. And that's very, very good. I mean, Carl Levin always would meet with the students, but once he left office, their last couple of trips, we've had a hard time. So Senator Stabenow wants to help us out. We'll keep pressing other people as well, our congressional people, but they're not quite as open to that. But the great thing is the court. This is the first time where we're actually going to sit down with a sitting Supreme Court justice, and it'll either be Clarence Thomas or William Breyer. Both of them have offered up some time. So we got to squeeze that in around the ever-popular White House visit. So it's going to be very, very good because the kids are going to get a nice first-hand look and get to question and answer the real people who are running things for us over there. Let's see, something else I wanted to mention to you. Oh, we'll be at Arlington, of course. I just saw a picture in the paper of Anchor Bay. Was it Anchor Bay? Or one of our local schools got to lay a wreath at the tomb. None of those days are available the days we're going, so we'll go, but we won't be able to do that. But unless there's any questions, I mean, we've been doing this for quite a while. This is our 10th year now that we're doing this. Or it's kind of been a little, actually it's 8th because I'm going every other year anymore. As I get older, it's harder for me to do it as much as I'd like to. But nonetheless, so unless there's any questions, I think it's a great field trip. Yes, Annie, the student, Haley went with us, or going with us this year. Mrs. Miller went with us previously. There's lots and lots of people that have been an active part of this. It's just a great educational opportunity for the students.
Now, can I ask a question?
Yes.
How long is the meeting with the Supreme Court?
It's 30 minutes.
Is that with just the Richmond group, or is that with a large conglomerate?
It's just us.
Wow.
Yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. It's kind of an accent. I met Clarence Thomas when I was at a conference in Washington. He brought his mom to Mount Vernon for her birthday. So, and he made the offhanded comment that, well, you know, if you're ever in Washington, they have students. Well, I took him up on it. See, I sent the letter, and he was kind enough to respond. So that's the way we're going. So, yeah.
Great opportunity.
It'll be great, yeah.
Dr. Litt, can I just ask?
Sure.
You put on here, you always put something into the newspaper.
Mhm.
And forgive me if I didn't see. Do we get any kind of, when you send that in, do we get anything in the newspaper that talks about our kids going in?
Some years yes, some years no. Yeah. So the Times Herald is not real good about it. The local Richmond paper has been much better about that. Right. Yeah.
Thank you. Now our process, as you know, we present this week, and then in 2 weeks is when we will take action on it. We don't have to come back to the meeting.
Okay.
Mr. Walmsley will let you know that we voted on it, voted yes, and you'll be able to go. So have a great trip. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for taking the kids. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, next is our audit presentation.
Here tonight is Jennifer Watkins from Yo and Yo, our auditors who completed the FY 16 audit. You have a hard copy that was presented. It's the same document that you have in your packet that was put on
All right. Good evening, everybody. What we're going to go over tonight is a PowerPoint presentation, which is basically a summary of what you received. You received 2 bound copies tonight. One is your actual audit report, that's the thicker copy, and then there's a smaller report, which is your single audit report. So basically everything that is very important will be included in this presentation. If you have any questions during it, feel free to shout out or let me know, and we can stop and have your questions, or we'll have time at the end as well. But sometimes it's easier to catch them right when they come to your head, especially with things like this. So, okay, the first thing I wanted to go over was the district responsibility. You guys have obviously been on the board, some of you, many years, and business office and business officials have been getting audits for many, many years. But a lot of people think that the auditors come in and they do your financial statements for you, or they're the auditor's financial statements. So we just like to point out that these are the district's responsibility. We do not prepare your financial statements. We do not prepare your numbers. The board is responsible for hiring and monitoring the business office to ensure that they're the proper people in place to do that. and we would not be independent, which we have to be, if we actually prepared your financial statements. So just important to know. In the same light, the auditor's responsibility, the auditor is hired to actually give an opinion on those financial statements. So we do many things during the audit and before the audit to be able to say that in the end, your financial statements are free from a material misstatement or not. So how I look at that is everybody talks about materiality when it comes to audits and what does that actually mean. I look at it that somebody either on the board or management or a public figure or the state would not think differently about your district financial situation by anything that could have possibly been missed. That we cover it from top to bottom enough to be able to say that nobody would ever change their opinion about the district. This is an example of some of the audit procedures that we actually do. It's a short list because they seem to go on and on forever, but the one thing I wanted to point out is right there at about the middle, it says unpredictability. That's something important to remember, especially with audit firms, that you want to make sure that they are doing unpredictability because, as I said, many business officials, they are used to having an audit. Many audit firms, they ask about the 95% of the same information, and they're expecting what we're going to ask for. So our firm, we always give a level of unpredictability every year. This year, I think we tested supplies and equipment that were smaller amounts, things that typically we wouldn't test or look at to kind of just give an element of surprise and look at things that we're not used to. A lot of times we'll hit miscellaneous accounts, smaller supplies accounts, make sure that they have proper approval, that they're going to the proper place, and just test some of those things that aren't always on the list. Okay, the actual audit results. Get to the nitty-gritty of everything. There were no material weaknesses noted, so that's a good thing. There was one significant deficiency noted. There's 2 bullet points there, but it's actually one item. It deals with audit preparation. So as you guys are well aware, there was turnover in the business office, and there were some items that were not reconciled properly when we came out for field work. So that resulted in adjusting journal entries, which we'll talk about that again in a little bit. With that, there was a corrective action plan done. It's in the back of your single audit report, which is kind of a weird place for it, but that's where Michigan Department of Education requires it. So I like to point that out because sometimes people miss it because it's in the back of the smaller report. But with that corrective action plan, basically, hopefully there won't be turnover next year, and then some more just proper training and monitoring of those reconciliations. Also, a lot of stuff that happens during the audit is one-time-a-year things. It just is. That's the way it is. Schools run on basically a cash basis. You're looking at those governmental funds, the general fund, on a monthly basis, and a lot of what we look at is changing it over to more for-profit style accounting, full accrual, and it's things that you only do once a year. The single audit, we audited the special education cluster as your major program. That covered almost 50% of your total federal expenditures, so quite a bit. That was an unmodified opinion on those, and also we had no material weaknesses or any material noncompliance with any of your federal dollars. Okay, the governance letter in the back of your audit report, there's a loose letter, which if you've been on the board before, you're used to seeing that. That's what we call the governance letter. A lot of that information in there is just regular information that we give to most school districts. Some of it, if there was anything that we needed to communicate to you separately, it would be in there. A lot of things with new and upcoming standards, and anything that we wanted to point out would be in there. So this is going to cover this, and the next couple slides will cover the significant items in that letter. So the first thing is significant estimates. If there are any estimates in your financial statements, we're required to point them out to you. We're also required to test them. There is 2 this year, useful lives of fixed assets. So basically just what it says, if you have a truck, we estimate that it would be usable for 10 years. That's just an estimate, and it affects both your accumulated depreciation and your depreciation expense. And then your net pension liability and deferred outflows and inflows related to that. If you've been on the board recently, you have been well aware of GASB 68, or if you're anywhere in the governmental, either school districts, or if you're familiar with a municipality, GASB 68 has been a hot topic for the last few years, dealing with that large net pension liability that's hitting your district-wide statements. So that deals with that. That number comes directly from the MIPSR's plan, and ORS gives us that number, which is then it's audited by the Auditor General of the state of Michigan. So it is an estimate. There's a lot of assumptions that goes into it, but it's the same way and the same information going to every school district in the state of Michigan. The other items on this PowerPoint, on this one, is regulatory items. There's 3 hitting here, which I think are the most probably important and the biggest items at the state right now. The Uniform Grant Guidance, we've been talking about that for several years. Some people have called it UGG or Super Circular, but that is the new guidance over the federal dollars. The biggest thing with that is some new policies on procurement and some other new procedures looking at internal controls over federal programs. They like you to have separate items for those, separate policies and procedures. The early warning legislation, the newest item there is the 5%. People have probably talked a lot about that, the 5%. They like your unrestricted fund balance or total fund balance, they go back and forth, is at least 5% or more of your unrestricted revenue. So typically years ago, it was always you take your fund balance and divide it into your current operating expenditures, and just in the last few years, they've changed that to your unrestricted revenue, which is really a much better view of where you're sitting because your federal dollars are in and out. Anything restricted, most of the time a school district has to spend it before they can even get it back. So that's a net zero. And then the UBAA, your Budgeting and Accounting Act, that changes every year with the state, but this year and last year they took a zero tolerance rule on that. Basically they say if you spend $1 more than what you've budgeted for, you are not in compliance with state law. Now, they obviously can't trace every dollar, but they look at it by total. So total current operating expenditures. So I like to point that one out because sometimes boards might want maybe a closer budget to actual variance or something like that. But when you're budgeting, you always have to budget for a cushion to be in compliance with this, because if you were to spend over your budget, you would be not in compliance and the state would come knocking. Other things, other required communications, you'll see on this list, no disagreements with management, no uncorrected misstatements. These things sometimes seem silly because we have no, but I like to point it out because if we had any of these things, I would let you know. So a disagreement meaning that we wanted something to be recorded that maybe they didn't agree with, or we felt a policy should be a certain way that they didn't agree with. Difficulties in performing the audit, normally that would be something like not timely information. So if I'm not getting things timely, I would think there was problems behind that. So we would mention those things to you, but we had none of those. Everything was good there. Audit adjustments, that we talked about a little bit on the previous slide with the significant deficiency. In your governance letter, they are spelled out for you. I think it's about in the middle of the letter. Most of them were not of too high dollar amount, but they basically came from either reclassifications or a couple of issues deals with maybe some extra training that needed to be had, which is going to come through that corrective action plan, or reconciliations being updated. For management comments, we had 3. They changed the name of those. Typically, I call them management comments, but these are matters for management's consideration. So these are nothing that we consider to be material, nothing that, I don't want to say they're not a big deal, but the materiality factor with that means that they're not going to affect your financial statements to a material matter. The unclaimed property, basically that deals with outstanding checks Every organization that I've ever audited always has outstanding checks that are a little bit outdated. Someone didn't cash them or somebody lost the check. So that's dealing with that statute. It is state law that there's a process that you do with those outstanding checks once they get past, I don't know if it's a year or 3 months, but our management comment is to follow that policy. Backdating of checks, we noticed a few items that were backdated. So having a check run after a specific date, which it would be year end in this situation, June 30th, and then checks were backdated to that day, which doesn't affect the bottom line at all, but if you're used to looking at financial statements, it affects where they're classified. So one would be cash, the other would be accounts payable. And then fund balance usage, we're gonna go over this in a PowerPoint slide that really can show you a lot better this exact comment, but just noting that fund balance has decreased for the past, I think, 4 years, and I believe is budgeted for another decrease for fiscal year 18. So it's just giving a consideration to that when you're planning your budget. Sometimes there's not much you can do about it, but it's just to point it out. So we like to make sure that if there's anything we think that you guys should consider or the business office should consider in your next year planning, we put it in that letter for you. Unmodified opinion. So this is the meat and potatoes of what we actually are paid to give you, and you did receive a clean opinion, which is the best opinion that we can give. It's called an unmodified opinion. It used to be called an unqualified opinion. The state does require that to be the case, that you get an unmodified opinion, but I do have some districts that don't receive that. So it's a very good thing that you see that. If you were a board member and saw something different, I would say that was reason to worry. So it was very good that that is what you received and it was clean. These are all, the next few slides are actual financial snippets from your reports. So if you see anything in here that you want to look at a little bit more in depth, they are in that thicker report that I gave you in section 4. So these are the governmental funds. You see the balance sheet. We had general fund, which is always a major fund, so we always show that separate. Debt funds, which was also a major fund, and then all other non-major funds are together in that third column. Total assets for the year ended at $4.7 million, and your two biggest categories there are cash, which is very typical, and your due from other governmental units, which that number is basically a fancy name for AR, accounts receivable, mostly your July and August state aid. So the money that is still due to the district at the end of the year. Your liabilities for the same funds are a total of $3.5 million, and you'll see here you had a state aid anticipation note, which is the second line down, of $1.6 million. So that is your cash covering for when you don't receive state aid. You have that note taken out, which is why your cash was high. And I always like to point out too, this is a snapshot of one day in time. The balance sheet is wherever everything landed on that day once you do all your accruals and reconcile everything. Oh, didn't want to do that. Uh-oh. Hold on. Messed up the whole presentation. Okay, here's your fund balance, separated out by fund and class. How I like to show it is basically if you go from the top to the bottom, you're taking your most restricted amounts at the top all the way to the bottom, which has your least restricted amounts. So your top is basically what it says, non-spendable. That money has already been spent on prepaid items. And then you have restricted. Restricted means it's restricted by a third party, an outside party, which food service and debt service both are. Assigned is an internal restriction. So that assigned figure is what is being estimated to be spent with the original budget for fiscal year 18. And then your total unassigned is everything left over, which for general fund is about $633,000. So your total fund balance for the district as a whole is almost $1.2 million at the end of the year. This slide just shows your capital assets, so we don't go over in the PowerPoint your actual district-wide statements because that's not, as a board, something that you guys focus on a monthly basis. Those are your first probably 2 to 3 pages in that section 4 in your report. But the two main differences in your governmental funds that you're used to seeing in your district-wide statements are capital assets and long-term debt, plus the net pension liability. So it's taking anything long-term in nature and adding it to what you're used to seeing. So we specify the capital assets and next the long-term debt. There is footnotes if you are into reading. I think there's about 30 pages of footnotes, but anything that you see here that you wanted more information on, usually anything of a large value, there's a specific footnote on it that you can read all about it. So capital assets for the end of the year, your net capital assets was just over 26 million. And you can see the breakdown here. Last year, they were almost 27 million. So overall, most of the decrease there you can see is just from your regular depreciation expense. There was not a large amount of additions in the current year. This next slide shows your long-term debt. So you have a beginning balance of almost 24 million, and you had additions of about 4.3 million, and then reductions of 6.1, almost 6.2 million, having an ending balance of 22.1 million. You'll see in that top column the general obligation debt, an increase and a reduction of a comparable value. There is some additional regular payments in there, but there was also a refunding that I believe saved the district, or well, the taxpayers, about $230,000 for last year. So that's very good. A lot of districts right now are taking advantage of those refundings and getting some cost savings out there. This slide shows your comparison, budget to actual. If you want to see detail on these figures, it's the first page, 5-1, and possibly 5-2 if I have them memorized in your large audit report. Shows a breakdown of all of this. You had a final budget, you had an estimate of having a decrease in your fund balance of $232,000, and you actually ended up as a decrease of $176 million. So ended up a little bit better than what the final budget was. And then you'll see for 17-18 fiscal year, you're budgeting to have a use of fund balance of about $180,000. And then your differences, you can see there both are under 3% when you look at your final to actual budget variances. With the turnover in the business office, again, I would say that's very good variance, especially the fact that your expenditures did come under what you had thought you were going to spend. Here's your general fund broke out just in a pie chart, a little different way of looking at things. What I like to point out here is that if you look at the state and local, that makes up any foundation allowance, including your property taxes and your unrestricted state aid. There is some other funds in there a little bit and some restricted state dollars. But those two values together, making up about 94% of your total, is basically by pupil is what you get that revenue for. So the only way to change that revenue amount or increase it, unless the state does it through the foundation allowance, is by getting additional pupils. So it is very determined on what your pupil count is. That's why a lot of times it's hard to, you can't really create more revenue. You almost have to go through the expenditure side when you're looking at the budget. Here is your general fund expenditures by function. So instruction was at almost 60%, 59% there. Supporting services at 39%. And then everything else was just very, very minor at about 2% for everything else combined. This is just a different way to look at your expenditures. It's by object. I like this one a lot because you can see what you're actually spending on salaries and benefits. So in this case, you're at 80% if you take the salaries and benefits combined. So that's retirement, health insurance, FICA, all of those things would be in the benefits category, and then purchase service at 13%. And probably, maybe 5 years ago or so, that number used to be about 85% or higher. But as districts have used more purchase services, usually as that piece of the pie gets a little bit bigger, the other two sections get a little smaller. And we're gonna hit on the retirement rate in a couple slides. So that will kind of explain why the employee benefits is at 30% when your salaries is at 50%. This slide shows a 10-year enrollment trend analysis. So you were just under 2,000 FTEs or pupils, in 2008. And last year you ended with almost just over 1,400 pupils. And these next few slides are all going to be a trend analysis, and you can kind of see the correlation to obviously your foundation allowance and the declining in enrollment. Your foundation allowance trend, 10-year analysis. So in 2008, you had 7,200. In 2017, 7,500. I do think this is a little interesting to think about. Until 2016, you were working with a foundation allowance that was less than what you had basically for the last 8 years. And it is also interesting, I always tell this little funny story because my staff put together these PowerPoints and I gave them back one and I said, all these foundation allowances are wrong. And they said, well, doesn't everybody get the same foundation allowance in the state of Michigan? And I said, no. And I think many boards would find that amusing. So I said, no, they do not. So if you take a look at that with the enrollment and then your increase in the rates for retirement and health insurance, it's kind of obvious on where the trends are going. Here's your general fund balance. The blue line is your unassigned portion and the green line is your total. The reason why there's not one blue line for the whole time is that GASB 54 came out in 2011, and that's when the unassigned language came into play. But you can see 2008, you were almost at 550,000, where your highest year was 2013 at about 1.4 million. And then in 2017, you had a total general fund balance of the 848,000. Okay, here is two ratios that one I talked about earlier with the early warning legislation, and the other one is the fund balance as a percent of your expenditures, which is a lot of boards are used to seeing. Plus the state still looks at this, and it is just one factor that the state looks at with all of the early warning legislation. They look at many factors, but you are still above that 5% by about 2.7%, so you do have some leeway for 2017, and then you can see the comparison there for 2016. You were at 9.3% for fund balance as a percent of your unrestricted revenues. And here is a slide for the last 10 years for MIPSR's rate history. You can see in 2008, you were almost 17%, with 2018 is being estimated to be almost 37%. So on your actual financial statements, your employee retirement cost is the 37%. That's the expenditure line item that you'll see. The difference there, that gap between the blue and the green, that's the 147C money that you do receive from the state to kind of backfill that cost. I do always like to point out that 147C the state could decide to take away that money at any time, but for right now, the rate is being capped at about that 25%. And you can see the rates kind of all over the place since 2013, but it is at that capped amount. It's just that there's so many rates available to your employees now that the payroll department has to keep up on. That's why it kind of teeters there around that 25% mark. Okay, just a few closing other highlights. The refunding of the bonds that I mentioned earlier, I think that's a really good note to mention, is the $230,000 of cost savings. The net pension liability, that did remain pretty much flat for 2017 at $20 million. Last year, we adopted GASB 77, which deals with tax abatements. If you keep up on the GASBs, there's always new GASBs. They're up to, I think, 85 right now, which we'll be implementing in the next few years. But that one dealt with just a footnote for school districts and related entities, different governments, that if they have tax abatements in their area that they're not receiving property taxes from, that we were to footnote them. Bulletin 1011 and 1014, that's just some good information. If you go out to the Michigan Department of Education's website and put in their search engine either one of those, you can get information on any school district in the state of Michigan that has some comparative factors. If you want to look at your district compared to any variety, you can do it by pupil size for your district. You can do it by area, any various things, and they show breakdown of business office costs per pupil or instruction costs per pupil. Lots of different good information there. GASB 74 and 75, that's the new GASBs that will be implemented. 75 will be coming into play next year. We talked a lot about GASB 68 when that was coming up. GASB 75 is almost the same thing as 68, only it's for the OPEB piece of MIPSers. So MIPSers is, let's say, 25.78%. There's a large portion of that that deals with your pension benefit cost, and then there's a portion that deals with your other post-employment retirement benefit piece, which is health care for retirees. That piece did not get put on the books with a net pension liability. They waited to do that till a couple years later. So basically that $20 million that's sitting on your district-wide financial statements, next year you'll have another figure. It will be large. It will not be as large as the $20 million. But again, that number will come from ORS. It will be audited by the Auditor General. Every district in the state of Michigan will be in the same place as you, putting it on the books, but you will have another large liability. So basically what that does is that makes your net position on your full accrual district-wide financial statements go down because of that number. But I think every district is in the same boat as that. I taught a class at MASB over the weekend, and I mentioned that sometimes you want to take, if you see that large negative on those statements, that statement that says deficit, districts don't like to see the word deficit, but those are district-wide. The state does not consider you to be in a deficit, and I always take that figure and add back my net pension liability to kind of see really where the district is in a full accrual setting. And other than that, I am available for any questions, but I do want to say thank you. I know that there was a lot of changeover in the year, and having an audit, we come out and ask every question from here to there and bug everybody, and the business office was very helpful getting us all through the audit, and it was filed timely, so with an unmodified opinion, so that's a good thing. And we just want to say thank you, and thank you to the board, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Tim, would you mind just talking about the corrective action plan so the board understands what we've already done and started that process? As Jennifer mentioned, there was, with the changeover in business, we have basically 3 people in our business office. 2 of the 3 were brand new to Richmond for the final audit. Tammy has experience with budgeting and finance and all that, but she didn't have experience with Richmond's budget. So she had that learning curve. Judy, who just started in February, this was her first end of the year audit. 2 of the key people in pretty much everything that the O&O asked for came from. So I just want to ask Tammy just to share with what we've already done to correct that so that we have it fixed for next year.
Yes, our corrective action plan includes working with Macomb ISD, they provide our financial software. So we've had some training, I think it was last week, we had Cindy Schwartz from Macomb ISD come out. She worked with us on handling accounts payable properly at the end of the year to not have backdated checks anymore. That was just a misunderstanding, so that's been handled. And then we will work with her as far as reconciliations. What accounts give us trouble in reconciling them, and how can we make it easier to reconcile? So we have a lot of grants, so it's setting up the accounts to make grant reporting easier and reconciling those grants easier. So that's what we're working on.
And I would just like to thank Tammy and her predecessor, Vicki, who set the stage for this. They do an outstanding job, and I have every confidence in the world in them. Judy McIntyre, who's in the accounts payable and purchasing area, and then Michelle Newsom in the payroll. These are two very dedicated ladies who want to make sure that we do everything right. They put a lot of time and effort. So that corrective action, I have all the confidence that it will be now. It won't be there next year. So thank you.
Good? Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
so much. Thank you.
Okay. We are moving on to our first reading of Board Policy 7250, Commemoration of School Buildings, Facilities, and Objects. This was a discussion that we had, a month or so ago, and about looking at what our policy was for naming of facilities and looking to maybe do something different with that policy. A committee was formed, and Dave and Ryan and Kyle very nicely volunteered to take part in that committee. And so we as a board have received the work from the committee sitting in front of us. What I just passed along was I had a couple questions from some people, and that's just the copy of the stuff that we had a long time ago. Some questions were asked, so I just asked Brian, can you just make sure you have those copies, just in case people couldn't find them, if they needed to bring them with them tonight. So as we usually do, we're calling this a first reading. I'm not sure if technically that's really the correct way to call it, because we may have some changes. The committee may have to go back to the drawing board. I'm not sure. So it might be a first reading, and it might be just a reading and work. So with that being said, I don't know if the committee wants to say anything to start, or if we just want to, or if you want to start with board members that weren't part of the committee that maybe have questions about the policy.
Well, just to give you some background how we got to what's in front of you, about a week after we had the meeting that we were going to form the committee, Ryan took the ball and really ran with it. And about a week after that meeting, he emailed Dave and I and Brian pretty much the framework of what you see in front of you. And we had about 2 weeks between then and when we met, to have our questions and be ready to have a discussion on, I believe it was the 19th of October. And we met for probably a couple hours and, hashed this out. And, Brian was a great resource while we were discussing it. And that's pretty much how we got to what's in front of you.
Okay. I don't know how we want to do. Do we just want to go paragraph by paragraph, or does someone who has a question?
Margaret, if I may briefly, as I was preparing for the meeting tonight, I noticed that there was kind of a garbled paragraph that we had, when we were going through this, we were adding language and subtracting language, and under the nomination requirements and process on page 1, the final paragraph ended up a little bit garbled. We forgot to delete a few words. So I emailed this to Brian earlier today. He made a copy for everybody of what the language should have been, and how it should read.
So do we want to go paragraph by paragraph like we kind of normally do? What's the?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
Okay. Who wants to start? Does anyone have something in paragraph 1, I guess? I do. Do we want to put swimming pool in there when we don't have a swimming pool?
Oh, in the parenthetical stuff?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's probably not necessary.
Okay. Second paragraph, nomination requirements and process. And that's where this new one comes in. So we should be reading this.
Correct.
This one with the rest. Okay.
In the first paragraph, it says that nominations may come from the board or from current or former administrators, teachers, students. In the second paragraph, nominations from administrators, teachers, students, members of the community. The board's included in the first and not included in the second paragraph. Does that matter?
That's,
Is that on purpose? Or,
I'm sorry, we're looking under the nomination requirements and process. Under the first paragraph, it says from administrators, teachers, and students, or members of the community.
Right.
And what was the other part you're looking at?
in the
We have board
first,
up
it
here.
says nominations
Right.
may come from the board or from current or former administrators, teachers, students, or members of the community.
I don't, that was intentional, because the process is different. As we go through this, the board, when they wish to commemorate an object, they can just send the matter directly to appoint the subcommittee, direct it that way without going through the form. So there's two different procedures, I guess, for when we voted to do this of our own volition versus when a group from the community is getting the ball rolling themselves. So that was just meant to convey that nomination requirements and process from administrators, teachers, students, or members of the community have to complete the form.
So you're saying a board member wouldn't have to complete the form?
The board, if we decided to commemorate an object, would not have to complete the form necessarily, no.
I don't think we want to do that.
Okay.
I think we want us, whatever the process is, should be the process for everybody. Yes?
Well, I think that there should be a process, I guess.
And
But
it should
then,
be
but then
everybody.
if the delineation, I wasn't clear that there was the delineation between those, that's what that was reading to be, that there was a different process. That wasn't clear to me in the language that was here. So I guess I think the process needs to be the process. And then if there's a person from the board who brings it forward, they cannot sit on that subcommittee.
Right.
Isn't that what that means?
That would make sense. If I bring something, I certainly can't sit on the committee that decides whether they're gonna take my nomination.
So the committee decides, if you submit a form and we're a committee, we decide, we come up with a recommendation and bring it back to the board and then we all vote. Is that the process? The committee doesn't
Correct.
just decide, they bring a
No,
recommendation
correct,
back.
correct,
Okay.
yeah.
So then does that person vote? Person did the form?
I think you could,
You can vote, just not be on the committee.
yeah,
Mm.
right, wouldn't you think? Because if you're on the committee, you kind of have
Yeah,
a way to sway to even get it to the board.
yeah.
So then what are we looking at? We went, so the board should be included down in that next paragraph. The process has to be for everybody. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
Yes?
I think so.
Okay.
That's, yes.
Anything else in that nomination paragraph?
So what's the difference between the paragraph, the new paragraph and the paragraph that is here?
What are you referring to, the?
What's the difference between the commemoration paragraph and the nomination requirement
No, what I'm
process?
asking is what's the difference in the new language we just got?
Handout that
cleaner.
that Ryan passed.
page.
Yeah, on the second sheet, Tracy on the
Yes.
second sheet, has the red fonts.
Oh, that's the part I
That's
missed.
the change
Thank
on
you.
what, the clarification of that paragraph.
Thank you.
Are you good? Yes?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
just
sorry.
want- Okay, all right, moving on to the next, the appointment of the subcommittee, that paragraph. The very last sentence, I think it's the last sentence, the subcommittee shall submit a non-binding recommendation. I don't know personally that we need it to say a non-binding because a recommendation of a committee is not binding. I think goes without saying, they just submit a recommendation regarding the naming or renaming to the board. I don't think it needs to say non-binding.
Yeah, we could probably take that out.
What?
We could probably take that out. I had that as well.
So if we can take that out.
I also was curious about the language that said that it had to happen at the next regularly scheduled board meeting, just in a sense that there could be circumstances where that didn't work. You don't want it to hang out there for forever, but that really is a decision for the superintendent and the board president to make versus a policy to make that.
So just leave it at renaming, shall submit a recommendation regarding the renaming or renaming of a school building, facility, or object to the Board of Education, period.
Yeah. I mean,
But I get,
Yeah, I don't want to limit us.
yeah, because,
Well, would you put some type of time frame on it? Because that way, without it, it's somewhat open-ended.
That was the concern, I think, is just making sure that it is done timely. So maybe if we just said within a reasonable time or something like that.
Or timely, or,
well, but what does timely mean, though? Timely could mean, yeah, anything to anybody. I think if you just, it's going back to the board. I think if something's come to the committee and there's a recommendation, I think that, to me, means there's something happening that we're looking to commemorate something, so it's something that needs to be done. And I don't think we have to worry about saying timely or anything else. I think it's just a matter of give the recommendation and it will happen.
I think you should have to trust that the communication is going to happen between the committee and the president and the superintendent to know when it's going to be able to be on the next appropriate meeting. Just have to trust that that's going to happen.
Anybody else? Ryan, that was the only thread on here, right?
Yep.
Keep them in. Okay. Next is criteria for consideration. Anybody? Okay.
Well, I guess I would just say that if a school district's going to commemorate something, it really needs to be in honor of someone who's made a district in the aspect of the school district for children and for possibilities within the school district. I don't know that, So when I read that it's going to potentially then be people who've made a difference in the nation, people who've made a difference in the county, people who've made a difference in the state,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I expect it to be people
Strictly our
who
school
have made a
district.
difference here at Richmond Community Schools. I suppose someone can leave here and become a Supreme Court justice after
That's
they
how
were
I
a
read
student
it.
here, and potentially we would name something after them after they have done that, but I also would expect for them to have done something here at the local level when they were a student that was wow or in the process. So that language kind of concerned me, I guess.
But wouldn't that negate the years of service to Richmond community, if applicable?
What do you mean?
You're saying that you're worried, not that you're worried, you're concerned that it has to be something more local. Wouldn't this process rule that out? Let's say I wanted to name, Joe Biden Junior High or something, that in the process of consideration, that would just work itself out. That if people didn't want it, then it wouldn't happen. And if people did want it, then you would have the process of consideration would back it up. You're saying that you want to cut that out altogether and limit it only to Richmond people.
I'm saying that commemoration here in this school district, to me, feels as though it needs to be people who've made an impact first here in this school district.
Or solely.
Or solely. How have they impacted children here in this community through this school district? So that's the question I guess I'm asking. I understand that in a vetting process, potentially you could go through that, but that's very dependent on the people who are involved in the process then and what they think about that versus changing the policy to be more local
I guess
and have it say that.
As we were going through it, it was a discussion of whether we wanted to limit it to Richmond or whether we wanted to leave the option out there for naming a building after a president or our local congressman who's been in office for dozens of years or something like that, If we wanted to limit it, we certainly can. I think the process would probably work this out on its own. I think we could trust the people that are conducting the subcommittee and the people that are on the board at the time voting on it to make that decision. If there's a candidate that made a really large contribution on a national or state level that really benefited this community as well, I mean.
And there's lots of governmental buildings that they could be named for.
And if we're looking at though, Ryan, that we want to, we're looking to commemorate something within our school district. If you leave it just to happen and with the hope of whoever's on the board at the time works it out, but part of the criteria talks about the county, the state, the nation. So if that's not what this board that's creating this policy, if we're looking at people who have made a contribution to Richmond Community Schools and its students and staff, then I don't think all the rest of that needs to be there. If that's what we're looking at.
When I sat on the committee, one of the things that I was looking at from the lens of implementing this policy, and so the way I look at this policy is your very first statement says, we can commemorate something in this district for someone who's done good for the district, the community, the state, the county, the state, the nation. When you go to the criteria, I believe that if they have not made significant contributions to the school or the Richmond community, that subcommittee would say, well, then why are we considering them? Because I think that goes to what you're trying to get at, that they've impacted the students of Richmond, the community of Richmond, however you want to classify Richmond. And that's where I think the vetting process wears out when you start looking at those 1 through 7. I think what it does allow you to do, or any board, is if you wanted to name a building after a president, and Kennedy High Schools, how many of those are there across the nation? He probably didn't do a significant contribution to them specifically, but as a nation, it fell under that umbrella.
Sure.
And so in that vetting process, looking through those 7 criterias, you could then consider that and say, okay, well, we could say he or she didn't do anything for Richmond, so I don't think we should name him. And that's the way I was looking at it. So if members of the community, if you disagree with that, that's the way I was looking at when we had the conversation.
That was the thought process as far as I recall.
I would rather limit it now. Then, that's just my opinion. Just to, instead of leaving it open to whatever board is there at the time and their, I don't know, I would just rather limit it to Richmond now. That's mine.
Me too.
So on that first paragraph, reserved for the prominent individuals who made significant contribution to the enhancement of education generally or to the well-being of the district.
Period.
District or community?
I would say community too.
District or community,
Yeah.
period.
Yeah, because that's in our name, community.
I say
schools.
district, but
I like community.
okay, if community is involved, I suppose.
I mean, it's Richmond Community Schools. I think it seems appropriate.
Well, okay, then let me go one step further with the two things that I had. In a lot of these policies that we looked at, the person that something was being named after, whatever, had to be deceased or retired from the district so many years. I think that needs to go into this criteria.
That was one of the questions that I was gonna ask as well, because what if someone falls from, you know,
Grace. Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
after the building's named.
That is addressed later
Right, right. That's what I'm
down the
saying.
list, in removal of commemorations for cause.
So when it is.
But I think it should be in here, that should be the
Right.
criteria. Because most of these say 5 years, and a couple said 4 years retired, or some just say no longer working for the district, something like that. But I think we need to work that in. And with that being said, if you're talking about deceased, retired from the district, then that goes back to Tracy's question of, are we naming someone who's done something for the district or for the community? Or are you saying because they've worked for the district, they've done stuff in the community? I don't know. I don't really so much have a problem if it's district or community. I would rather see it say district, but I don't have a problem. But I really think we need to put wording in there about deceased.
Well, it says
So-
in the event of damage, decay, or death, they would be, it doesn't say like if they fell.
As a
I didn't
criteria
see
for
that.
consideration. I don't, that would be fun.
So what you're saying is that the person who would be honored by this would not be a current employee.
Correct.
Right.
Would be someone who has retired or left the district? Retired or left the district?
Oh, I
Two
think it's
different
retired.
things?
I think it's retired, leaving the districts. I think retired.
Okay,
Because
well,
they,
just,
because these,
clarify.
a lot of these say retired.
Retired and or deceased. But it doesn't necessarily have to be someone who worked for the district.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, I
Right.
mean,
Right?
I think it should be
So the
someone who's
language
worked for
has
the
to be
district.
broader than that in some ways, I guess. I mean, because a volunteer
Well, I was gonna say,
would not have retired from the school district.
Yeah,
A
what if
volunteer who
it's-
made amazing things could have a
Yeah.
hallway named after them.
What if there's
Yeah,
an
but-
organization
You know
in
what I'm saying?
Richmond that does something great for us, and they're not working for us, but they do something great for us? I mean, I don't know.
They're a coach for years and years, and they have a baseball diamond named for them.
But they would retire from being a coach at some point.
True.
They may not retire though.
They might not.
Some people don't.
They could be a
Well, if
volunteer.
you stop coaching, you don't do it anymore, you would have be retiring. Well, you could say retired or no longer works for the district, because some of them say no longer work or no longer affiliated with the district. So I think there should be some kind of language
No longer
like that.
affiliated.
No longer
I like
deceased
that.
and no longer affiliated with the
Yeah.
district. So that takes in
Did
that
you-
they've retired.
Did you just say no
or they
longer
just-
Or if
deceased?
it's a
No,
volunteer.
no, deceased or no longer affiliated.
Resurrections happen.
So this would include people who, I want to name that room after Eric Lamont because he's done some wonderful things with technology. He is no longer affiliated with the district. So in implementation of that policy, that could come to, and I apologize for picking on Eric, but as you looked at his office,
Well, I
that
would-
policy could.
I would like him to have to be deceased too. I think it should say
Deceased
deceased.
and-
Well,
Well, I like no
that's
longer
not-
affiliated.
But I think you just run into problems, and I've seen it, and I was part of a school district, when something is named after someone who was alive and then fell from grace. You know, there was issues with the district, and then they had to tear down the name of the building, where if someone is deceased, their life is done, there's less chance of that happening.
Right.
I don't think that's a bad idea.
Yeah,
I'd be in favor of that.
So no longer affiliated and deceased.
Well, I think, how about if we don't have them in the same line? Like, one line, you know, should be deceased, and then maybe the next line, no longer affiliated, so we're not saying,
If they're
you
deceased,
know.
aren't they not affiliated? I mean, doesn't that go without
I don't
saying?
know, I
What do you
just,
think?
you're putting it together, I don't know.
What if
I think
in
deceased
just
covers it.
sorry, what if someone wants to donate a large sum of money to renovate a wing of the high school, and they were a student at Richmond? They've lived here their whole lives, but they did not work for the district. They didn't retire from the district, and they're still alive.
Like when Kyle builds that sports dome that he wants, right? We want it named Kyle Simmons Sports Dome. He's alive, right?
Well, and then, Ryan, if you want to bring that up, then you have to go back to work and find another paragraph or something that speaks to that, because to me, that's something completely different from this, or in addition.
Well, I would look at that as, first of all, if they're donating it, it falls within the donation policy.
Oh,
of the
there you
district.
go.
But if they're donating with the caveat of it has to be named after Kyle Simmons Dome and Baseball Stadium, that's a whole different ball of wax, because that violates the donation policy
Right.
if there's strings attached.
But what if we
it's a
just-
donation, I would say that falls under the donation policy. But if you want to name it after it, then that doesn't fit here, because that person would not be deceased.
What if it's not a string attached, but we just want to?
Well,
Is that
this is
better?
this is the policy for naming.
Okay.
So if you want to name it, this would be.
I think we
where-
should have the option, or something like that.
I mean, if you put the "or" in there, it gives you, as a board, to look at the case by case as it's coming in front of you. It identifies what the criteria you're looking for, but it doesn't, again, that you've got to wait for the person to die, be deceased, to get the name.
Could be a long time.
So, but I definitely see the value in not everybody and anybody being named.
Sure.
So you guys will come up with something that works in there to bring back to us. Anybody else?
I just had a question about the word moral. That's included in this language in this section a couple of times. Can somebody who was on the committee, and when they put that in there, what do you mean by that word?
Well, I think it's, if you look at the examples of the other school districts, they include that in there. So, again, is it open to interpretation? I think it's a good thing to have. I don't think it stands alone and by itself, but, I think that it's something that should be included in the process.
So those
Perhaps-
5 letters don't declare their good moral fitness?
They could, or they might not. Well, let's assume that they would, and the person was a rat, then you'd still want to have the, I think that we want to have, I think we want to have the committee to have the most options to look at this and figure out.
But who's saying that it's good moral fitness? And
What
character?
is the criteria for good moral fitness? I think
I'm just
is
asking.
maybe what the question was. What does that mean? You're explaining, what does that mean to those of you on the committee? What?
Is this something like the definition of art that I don't know what it is, but I know when I see it? I can't tell you what moral fitness is, but some of that doesn't have it, I can tell you.
Well, no, I'm saying moral fitness. If I'm sitting on the committee, and I'm just going to throw this out there, I'm sitting on the committee, and this person has been married 5 times, and I find that not to be a very moral, a very good moral compass, because I think you should only be married one time. That's what I'm throwing out there. That what does that mean when you're saying that? What for a candidate? What does that mean?
Well, let me
what
turn-
on the
let me turn it-
application's gonna show you?
Generally, moral fitness would be interpreted to mean criminality, depravity, that sort of thing. I mean, marriage and divorce are legal things. I think this would be more like a person who taught in the district for 30 years, did outstanding things, and then, you know, had an embezzlement conviction 15 years ago or something like that. You know?
Okay, but marriage and divorce is, that's an opinion of someone's morals. Whether it's a legal thing or not, you can sit on a committee and you can judge someone for that and think that they don't have the moral fitness.
But it says moral impact on students, staff, and community, so how would my divorce have a moral impact on a student? Hopefully I'm not talking with my students about any marriages and divorces, right?
I just threw that out there.
Yeah,
as an
no, I'm
example,
just saying.
Because I want an example of what
'Cause it doesn't-
moral fitness was.
No, sure, I'm just saying, it doesn't say moral in general, it's saying a moral impact on the students. So
And
to
what does that
me,
mean? What's a moral impact on a student?
that's what they would have to see, yeah.
Maybe a teacher who also is a longtime advisor of a community service group within the school that's helping to teach kids about charity and responsibility toward the community and things of that nature.
Could be. And it says educational or.
It's the number 7 where it talks about the moral fitness
Right.
of the candidate.
Well, moral is used in 5 too.
Educational and or moral
Yeah.
impact. All other
I mean,
relevant to the character and moral fitness of the candidate.
I fully understand that means potentially that you don't want someone who has embezzled money
Right.
in the past. And, you know, and I get that that's where that, it's just that word has, to me, a really large scope of interpretation and.
Right, but wouldn't the word character also have a large scope of interpretation?
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Mhm.
And that one is kind of a catch-all that's, I think, decided or intended to be kind
Right.
of all-encompassing. Whatever, you know,
The
basically.
absence of that would be, do we think that it's not relevant at all what the character or the moral fitness of the person is that we're going to be naming something after?
Well, maybe, and number 3 might sum it all up anyway, relevant personal and professional characteristics.
It could be.
That takes care of the character part. The moral part's kind of in number 5. We could just axe number 7 and
It'll be fine.
be good with it.
So are you saying get rid of it as long as we keep number 3?
Well, I mean, 3 is, it's kind of talking about the same thing, so if number 7's the issue, we can just cross off number 7. It's talking about personal and professional characteristics in 3. Do we really need it repeated in 7?
So you think 7 is a little redundant?
Yeah.
It'll be fine.
Any change to 5? Do you want educational impact on the student? Take out and or moral?
I mean, I don't know, I kind of like what Ryan said about what if they, I mean, it is educational too, but like if they, what did you say, taught about something else? They
If
had
they're
some other-
a longtime advisor to a
Yeah.
community service group that was trying to teach civic responsibility and things of that
Yeah,
nature.
something like that.
Outside the
That could be a moral, I mean, it's educational too, but it could be moral. I don't know, I think it's not completely irrelevant. I'm fine with it being there. I think it is subjective, but I'm fine with it being there.
Are we okay with that?
It's not one of my favorite words, but not because I'm amoral, but it's because it sounds too preachy, but we can move forward.
So
It's
did
all
we say
good.
that we were going to, that being deceased was a criteria?
Yeah, we said that you guys are,
I think-
we'll figure something out.
With that wording. And maybe adding the donation, some piece about that, paragraph about that, right?
No, because we said that was something completely different, that would come with donation.
Well, he said we would put it in here if we want to make it. He said if there's no strings attached, the donation can't be, I'm donating this, but you have to name it against me. That goes against the donation policy. But he said if we want to decide and have the choice to name it, that would go in here, correct?
Yeah, actually, if someone's donating AstroTurf for the football field,
Right.
they donate it, the board accepts it. Now you decide to say you want a sign that says, we want to recognize the person donating, that donation would
Goes
go
in
in
here.
here, the sign.
Just for us to have the option, I think it's something that,
Could that fall under number 1? as being a contribution to the school.
Okay.
Next, public hearing and voting.
Since we're axing the non-binding
Yeah.
part above, we can
Yeah.
remove that here, I imagine, right?
Yep.
I don't know, do we need the whole thing?
I don't know that we need,
Yeah, the whole thing is our process and procedure anyway.
anyways.
The whole paragraph
Yeah,
is our
I'm-
process and procedure.
Yep.
We have public hearing, we have public comment, we have, it
And of
goes
course,
to
it
a
takes the
simple
majority
majority
vote.
vote. The whole thing is our policy.
Right.
It's what we do.
My thought was I don't think we need that paragraph at all.
Yes.
Is that on the board of eliminated paragraph?
I don't know. Right,
I mean, the only way for us to consider it is at an open session.
Right.
I mean, that all that, I mean, it's just not
No,
needed.
per established procedures. So public hearing and voting per established procedures.
But I don't think that
We don't
needs to
need
be
that.
in the policy. I mean, that's the way it is.
If people have questions about the subsequent policy, won't they find that out with the subcommittee in conversation with that? They'll know what's gonna happen next, and it's just what happens.
Right.
Would they know that, though? I mean, this is,
They'll find that out in the meeting with the subcommittee.
Right.
So I'm
Here's the
guessing.
process. So we're going to take that out?
Any objection?
Preparation and installation of commemorations. The only thing I have is that last paragraph. I don't really think that that's what the subcommittee, I think that would have to come to the full board.
Last sentence?
Yeah, where it talks about the plaques, the signage, all of it, that is approved by the subcommittee. No, it's approved by the board. All of that comes with the recommendation from the
But
committee.
I don't know if we were talking about language or if we were talking about dimensions of plaques and things of that nature. I don't think we were talking about language, though.
That's why I'll go with that.
Yeah, whether it's size, length, anything, it all comes to the board. Nothing's ever approved by a committee.
I think Brian, and that is true, I think Brian was anticipating that he would be able to settle at the subcommittee meeting, you know, issues as to the size of the signage and things that are policy in nature that can't be changed.
This is my thought on that one, is I get someone who wants to name the high school library after someone. We're sitting through the process, but they have no drawing, schematic, or what are you looking for to name it, but that is brought to that committee to say, okay, it's you know, they have this great big sign, okay, there's nowhere to hang the sign, so obviously you gotta shrink the sign down. Have some of those details worked out before it actually came to the board, say, okay, this is doable, what we can do, here's where we can put the sign, and then have that discussion. So that was the intent on here, so the subcommittee kind of had some, we're not interested in having a 4x8 billboard out on the front lawn of the high school,
Right.
maybe
Right.
a plaque.
Well, I still think that, I don't think it needs to be in there because it talks about the subcommittee. I think as part of that process, that it's 3 members of the board who know what the policy is, or you or whoever's the superintendent knows you can't have something that's big. You can't take that to the board. I just don't think we need the wording that says stuff gets approved by a subcommittee.
So you want to get rid of subcommittee and put in board?
No, I would just take it all out and it's just part of the process. If they bring something to a committee. Mhm. Because
David, you're looking at changing the word subcommittee, put by board? Is that what you were referencing?
That's what I was thinking.
Approved by the
Coordination with the superintendent, his or her designee, period.
Yeah, there you go. must be approved by the superintendent or his or her designee.
Isn't that the only language you need?
Yep. That works. So it would end right there, you're saying?
We don't have to approve the sign, is that what you're saying, Margaret?
No, it's gonna come to you as the form.
It would be part of the thing,
recommendation.
part of
would
the
already
approval,
be
but the
part of the
superintendent is
approval.
the one that would say, no, that doesn't mean.
By the time
policy.
it gets to preparation and installation, it would already have been approved.
Right.
So that's why it wouldn't have to come to the board.
So we're just removing the last sentence after designee? Is that-
Yes.
And that's similar to what we do now if you look at a baseball scoreboard. I met with Scott before that. Football scoreboard, Chris and I met with them before that. Before it actually came to the board to see if number one, is everything going to work out.
Next, related expenses.
This is the person nominating pays the expenses. So if the board is going to choose to nominate someone, the board owns those expenses. If a community member is raising money to have a baseball field named after someone, they own the expenses for that plaque or whatever they're going to do. That's what that was reading.
Are we good with that?
So it's this responsibility of the group to purchase however the commemoration is going to be signified. That's what that says, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, repair of commemorated objects.
This is talking about the repair of a signage or repair of the object, because it reads like it's the object. But then, like on the first page, when it gives the example of like a gymnasium or swimming pool, I mean, obviously if something happens to the gymnasium and it's called Margaret Telto Gymnasium, I mean.
Margaret Telto's not fixing.
You're not fixing a gymnasium, right? I mean.
I get, because
so-
I looked at it, and
Yeah.
said, we don't want that at all, because
No.
that's,
Right.
even a sign, it becomes our property.
It is, yeah.
When it's in, so I.
So we're sit-
So I-
Well, that is why we delete.
The bigger picture is you walk along this campus and you see a brick next to a tree that says in memory of so-and-so. That brick gets cracked and broken. Is that the district's responsibility to replace that brick, or am I just taking it out because it's now becoming a hazard and removing it and not putting anything in place? The sign in the nature garden in the back here, that sign you can't even read. Is that now the district's responsibility to fix it and put a new one? Or once it becomes damaged, take it down?
Well, and the sign I have less of a worry about. It's like, it's talking about object.
All right.
I'm thinking that's like
The
the
tree.
gymnasium.
No,
Or the tree dies.
Well, to me,
The-
that is under the removal, right?
Correct.
But I'm talking about like, if a big thing breaks, like a gymnasium, something terrible happens to it.
That's an intentional omission in that paragraph.
Okay.
Earlier, in the opening sections, it refers to buildings, facilities, and objects.
Yeah.
This is stating that buildings and facilities are obviously still, our responsibility for maintenance. This refers to objects and items that are commemorated, trees, benches, bricks. So it excluded buildings and facilities from
So
that
if
paragraph.
there's no family around it, something gets dedicated to Margaret Telto, and there's no family around and something breaks on it, it just becomes, it's not the school district's anymore, so it just
No,
goes away?
That's where
Well,
the
it's
removal of
that's-
that,
yeah.
we talk about with good cause to try to find it, that's under that one.
Notice to, I believe it was.
Something breaks, you got the Margaret Telto park bench, and it's broken, and it's a safety hazard. First of all, I'm gonna remove it to get the safety hazard out, but there's a clause, and I can't remember, I think it's in a removal.
It's the last
That I
paragraph,
have a
notice.
contact with the people who join and say, hey, it broke, are you willing to fix it? If they said, no, Margaret's gone, I don't wanna fix her bench, then it's gone.
Can
If
we
they-
fix it
If they
though?
say, yeah, can I get the benches? Absolutely, we're gonna get it fixed and
So
put it back.
none of that stuff becomes school property? It's not school property? It's not like when someone donates something to us, it's ours? The
van.
yeah,
Trailer.
The van trailer. So this stuff becomes our, because the scoreboard that we had out on the baseball field that was dedicated to an individual, when that came down, the conversation here at this table was that, you know, the family wanted that scoreboard, so wait a minute, that belongs to the school district, how is that all gonna work? So now this is completely different.
Well, if we're removing like the scoreboard, then we follow disposition of property policy, which says I have to put it out for bid. Where the policy is, and some people can bid on it. If the family wants to bid on it, they can. How we
So
get
if the
rid of
family's gonna bid on it, why is this?
This is,
I don't understand.
I guess,
this is meant for the repair. Excuse me, where are we at? Repair still? This
Well,
is meant
to me,
to maintenance.
to me, the repair and removal should be together if we're gonna do it, but it should be one paragraph. But I thought if something was given to the district, it becomes the district's property.
Donation, just.
So then how are we saying in here that we're not gonna fix it, where, you know, someone else has to repair? I don't understand that part.
well,
If it's our property, whether it's been donated, commemorated, why wouldn't we fix, if a sign, the nature sign, if it's fading or failing, whatever, that's our property, why wouldn't we fix it? This is saying that we're not responsible for that, the family is. So if the family dedicates something 30 years ago and it fails, it's Richmond school property, there's no family to fix it, the school district isn't it, because this policy says, well, it's not our problem. And so the lovely nature sign that was donated by a wonderful person 30 years ago just goes away.
History of it.
So that's what I just don't get.
Does it feel
in
as though
this.
there needs to be some, because I think that you can get to a point where financially,
You're
30
right.
years from now, it's not feasible to redo whatever, because of financial situations or whatever. So does there need to be some language that says the district will do their best to keep things up for a certain time frame? It's still the family's responsibility if it's, or something like that? I mean,
it
do
says
you
the
need to have language?
It says it will be honored through the life of the object. So if that object, like a bench, but I guess the first thing I want to clarify is this stuff is our stuff. It's not donated stuff. So this is commemoration of stuff that's already ours, right? That there's a difference there. It's not like somebody's donating a bench, because that would go under a different policy. This is, hey, that bench that you already have there, that's yours.
No, this
right?
would be, this would encompass all of that.
Yeah.
If I
Yeah, it's
have,
not a donation.
I want to donate,
Kyle Simmons wants his name on the baseball
But wouldn't that go
field.
under the donation policy?
But if Kyle's dead and his family wants to do, and he's been on the school board for 30 years,
Yeah.
and they, you know.
this encompasses any donation or any naming. So if you want, there's a tree out there, and Mrs. So-and-so liked oak trees. You want to put a plaque on it that says she was a great science teacher and.
That's already
for a
our
love of-
tree. It's not
That's
donated.
ours, it's not donated, but you're
Right.
going to put a plaque there.
Commemorating that tree.
Commemorating that tree.
Right, right.
That plaque's expense is by the, right now, the individual family or group that's raising that fund. We see a lot of, maybe it's our PTOs, our children's choir, or student council may raise money. That plaque is gonna have a life on it. At some point, that plaque's gonna fall down or need repair.
Yeah.
And so the question is it our intent as a board that anything that's donated, any plaque, any naming of something, that we will do the general maintenance of that item?
And I guess I'm reading it as the commemorated object. So the commemorated object is the tree, the oak tree. It's not the plaque. The plaque isn't commemorated, the tree
So if
is.
the oak tree dies,
Well, and I'm
is
thinking
it our
even,
responsibility to replace the oak tree?
well, I'm even thinking, what was it, a year or two ago when we had to cut all these limbs or something down because they were a hazard?
Right.
If that tree happens to be commemorated and now all of a sudden it needs to be trimmed, the family's not gonna pay for that. But that object is commemorated. The family's not coming to trim that tree.
So is the biggest concern the signage? The upkeep of the signage?
It seems like that's the bigger concern is the signage instead of the object.
It does say that the commemorated objects and/or related items, meaning the tree itself, if they donated the tree, or if they just donated the sign for the tree, then that item that's related to the
Could we,
commemoration.
But it wouldn't be donated, right? I guess I'm getting confused about donation. We have a whole different donation policy.
could we maybe, this repair, review, removal, that we maybe just based on this conversation, could maybe the committee maybe take what the conversation is and maybe come up with something,
And combine.
something a little different? Or
Well, if-
combine or do something and bring it back based on what the conversation's been?
Unless you want to build in some type of, a repair buffer when they make the initial donation, or you say that the repair is at the sole discretion of the superintendent or his designee. In either way, there's some benefits to both of those. So, I mean, the district's going to pick up the cost of, fixing the bench or fixing the sign or whatever, or we leave it at the sole discretion of the board or the superintendent who says, nah, we can't do that.
And that's the issue I have with going back to committee right now and redrafting this based on our conversation is there has to be some pretty clear indications as to whether we want to be financially liable for this stuff or not, whether we want to undertake the expense of maintaining this stuff or whether we don't.
Okay, well, what's our thought? Do we want to be responsible for that? I don't know why it can't go back to the committee, but if one of the questions is the concern wanting to know whether we want to be financially responsible, do we?
I think it depends on the item. Like you said, is it a trail or is it is it a cracked brick for a tree? It's going to depend on what the item is. Does
Right.
it have historical value? Does it not have historical value? Is it going to,
Well, then, there's your guide.
What if it was beyond the general maintenance and upkeep of the object? The decision of the repair or replacement would be at the discretion of the superintendent or board. Something along that line. So that if it's a large,
Keep your notes for when you go back.
What would, in your mind, repair that would be substantial? We're talking about plaques and trees and benches and stuff. You've got in here that if it's an act of God, then it's at our discretion to remove it, right? If it gets hit by lightning or something like that, can we incorporate repair into that as well, or?
I think that's what we're talking about, is including one section on repair, review, and removal, right?
I think combining these.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess if I look at it from the perspective of a family or a group or an organization that's wanting to do this, I would want to know upfront if I've got 10 years
Sure.
of repair that I got to cover on whatever.
But
right? Do you know what I mean?
what we had discussed was when you do a commemoration or you do something like that, that's basically a philanthropic endeavor. So you're doing it to, give money to the school district. So if you feel that way, and I can understand that, then why don't we buffer in, an additional dollar amount to call it maintenance and repair for whatever the timeline is that we want them to be responsible for. So maybe it's a 2-year thing or a 5-year thing, and then after that, it's at the discretion of, the superintendent or the board.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought one of our concerns when we were talking about this was trying to avoid controversy after the fact or allegations of favoritism or something like that. Well, by taking some of the leeway out of it, I guess, by saying, well, we paid $1,000 to repair this thing that's commemorated for this teacher, then why didn't we repair this or replace this? Or it's difficult, I think, deciding on a case-by-case basis whether or not we should be responsible for repairing or removing something, because people in the community might not agree with our decisions, and it could create controversy down the road.
Okay, what about length of commemorations? Does that work?
Well, I think you brought up a very good point. At some point, it might become a historical commemoration. So maybe if we put, as far as the length of the commemoration, at the discretion of the board, there are some things that we might want to keep, and there might be some things that we just decide we can't because there's too much wear and tear on it. but to have across the board the life of the object. Like I said, we might want to preserve it if it's got some historical value to it.
So are you saying just have it say the length or the existence, whatever, of the will be at the discretion of the board, just leave it like that? Or saying that at the end of that paragraph?
I mean, that might solve a lot of things. Say at the discretion of the board. I don't know. It might cause more problems too.
Are we talking about getting rid of the review section 2, or are we just talking about the length of commemoration?
Just length of commemoration.
Are you saying you want to say at the end of that at the end of that sentence, at the discretion of the board, or just change it to say the length of a commemoration will be determined at the discretion of the Board of Education?
Well, isn't that kind of talked
Because
about in
then
the
if
review?
someone does fall out of
Doesn't that really
grace,
say
then
that?
you could.
No, yeah, kind of.
And I think that that's, yeah,
Okay. All right.
so I don't want it to be redundant
All right,
either, you
so
know.
add that one into
At the discretion of the board?
Well, because if you look at the next one, it talks about review. We'll review every 10 years, all of that. It kind of is saying something different from the length of commemoration, so maybe kind of combine it.
I was going to say, that could be all combined,
Yeah.
and even with
Just-
removal for cause, it all could be combined.
It can all be combined, and it's just kind
Right.
of stylistically, I guess it was making clear there's 3 different standards, I
Right.
guess, or trying to. They're good for life, but we retain the ability to review after 10 years. If we decide we want to go in another direction, we can by majority of the vote, or majority of the board, and then we can remove for cause at any time.
Well, and I think you can, anywhere in there where you're talking majority of the board, you can take all that out of there, because that's just a given. So what about the last one? Notice of removal or replacement of commemorative objects, commemorated objects.
Brian, I know this was language that you specifically talked about this policy, about wanting direction about what to do, and so does this language seem like what would work as you implement
Try to
it?
attempt to talk to the families or see if they want to, I guess it's going to depend on what the outcome is going to be on what the board and the district's obligation is to repair and keep the upkeep of these objects.
And looking at that now, how do you feel about changing discarded to disposed? Can you ever imagine a scenario where you might want to sell something, or somebody might want to buy it, as opposed to discarding it by the district? Or do you want to just add that, discarded or disposed?
Fine, yeah.
It gives us more options, I guess.
And then the last, the attachment, of course, that's obviously, there's some things that will need to be taken off. The checklist and requirement and all that kind of stuff will just match with the changes.
Doesn't the form though also have signatures of the committee members on it?
Oh.
I don't know why that's necessary. But that's
Well,
just
because,
me.
because you can't approve it. All you can do is recommend, so yeah, that probably doesn't need to be there, Tracy, you're right.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna present, whoever's on that committee is gonna come and present it
Yep.
anyway, and so
Yep.
you're either gonna tell us then that you're approving it or not approving it, right? So I don't think that's necessary.
All right. Thank you. All right, moving on.
Do we have a time frame on this that we want to look at? Do we want to?
There's no rush, so you
All right.
guys figure out what, especially with the holidays and stuff coming up, figure out what works best in your schedules. Okay, next is our public comments portion of our meeting. If you would like to address the board, you may do so. You can come up to the podium. There is a card up there. You can leave your name and number. If you have a question that needs to be answered by the board, you have 3 minutes to speak. This is not a question and answer period, but if you would like something answered, please leave your name and number on the card. Is there anyone who would like to address the board?
Hi, yes. My name's Ann Durst, teacher at Lee Elementary and also robotics coach. And I just wanted to comment on this past Saturday. our first ever competitive season for FLL, which included our 9 fifth graders and 1 fourth grader. We were at in Utica Community School District at Henry Ford High School. And I want to give a shout out to the Thunder Chickens there, their high school robotics team. They were wonderful. It was a really great experience for all of our students. It was such a smooth, organized run competition. There were 32 teams there. And my 10 friends were separated into 2 different teams, the Water Warriors and the Champions. And they were a little lofty in their goals there, but with the champion. But our goal was to at least accomplish 2 of the challenges in the robot game. There were 14 challenges, and our goal was to get 2 of them, and 1 team got 2 of the challenges and 1 got 1. Just kind of show the difference between, there were teams there that scored at the top. Team had 324 points and we had 40 points. So there was a lot of teams that were down by us and a lot of teams were up here. But for the first time out, it was a really good experience. They go into 3 different rooms where they have to, there's 3 judges there, so they get asked what their project was, and the problem was about the water in the world. What is the problem with that? So they had to choose either the delivery of water or cleaning water. And one group chose to clean it because they were appalled with the things that happened in Flint, and then when they learned about other countries where the water is so bad, and they couldn't believe the statistics about how many billions of people die because of not having good water, and they just couldn't believe that. And the other group was transporting water. So they tried to develop their prototype to transport, instead of having in India where they carry the water on their heads and they go for miles and miles, 7 miles one way to get water and come back, and children are missing school. They thought that was terrible. So they wanted to improve on an existing system that's used. It's a barrel of water that they push that takes, it's quicker to get the water and back. So they wanted to make it a double barrel and recycle plastic to make it cheaper so that everyone could have one. And then another room was to talk about the core values and including everyone, cooperation, gracious professionalism, and then robot design was the last one. So I split up. Mrs. Shelley Dalio helped me coach this year. She took one of the teams, and I had the other one. We kind of hung with those 2 teams throughout the day, and it was just a really great experience. Of course, they were disappointed that they didn't receive any awards, but it was a good for us to reflect back on what we could do better to improve for the next year. I thought for our first outing, it was a good experience. And I'd like to thank the Blue Flame Propane, Tony's Heating and Cooling, and the Jason Myers Memorial Foundation. Those 3 were sponsored us this year, donated money. I solicited them, went to money and asked, and so they were on our shirts. Mr. and Mrs. Dalio, for the 2nd year in a row, paid for all the shirts for all the teams, for our team and the FTC team, which their competition, by the way, is this Saturday. The FTC, our first FTC team, that's 6th through 8th graders, will be this Saturday at Marysville High School. It's from 7 in the morning till 7 p.m. So that's going on for them with Mr. Gillespie as the coach for that. So I just wanted to thank everyone, and it was a really good experience.
Is there anyone else who would like to address the board? No? Okay. Moving on. Haley, your report.
Okay. As always, I'll begin with the elementary school. Today they had their Veterans Day Assembly. Also today was mixed staff night at McDonald's from 4 to 7. So the teachers get to work and get to go in there. And 10% of the profit goes to the elementary school's PBIS program. On November 21st, the elementary school had their chocolate fundraiser, so they get to have a pizza party on November 21st to celebrate their sales for that. November 29th is their holiday concert at 6 p.m. And then November 30th is the True Blue Assembly for them. For the middle school, winter sports are starting, and that's the same for the high school as well. So their tryouts are all in and go. Today was the 9th annual Veterans Day ceremony at the middle school. Also, the middle school did a pink out event and they raised over $700 for the Susan Komen Foundation through their event. So congrats to them. The 5th grade girls are participating in the Beautiful Me program at the middle school. This is new to the middle school this year, and it's like a positive self-image program for those girls. So that's really great that they're getting involved in that. Also, the middle school is working towards becoming a Macomb County Green School, so ideas are being shared and passed among staff members and students as well. Now on to the high school. Key Club is doing their first Kindness Week. Key Club is now ran by Miss Gake this year, so she wanted to change things up and add some things. So every day this week, there's something that gets the whole school involved that has to do with kindness. Like today when you walked in, you probably saw the Thanksgiving, the cards for Meadow Lodge. That was our event today. We called it Giving Monday. And then, for example, on Wednesday, this is the project I'm most excited about. It's called Richmond Rocks, and I don't know, I think that New Baltimore has done something like this, if you've heard of it before, but you take little rocks about yay big, and we paint them with like positive quotes or even just like a smiley face and leave them around the community for people to find, and it just kind of makes people smile, something to make someone's day. So we plan on doing those on Wednesday and then leaving them around the campus or the community. We talked about, dropping the majority of them off in the elementary school playground area because we thought they'd get a kick out of them. Like I said, winter sports are starting here. We have basketball, wrestling, and of course the competitive cheer team. With that in mind, we had 3 students, 3 seniors have signed to participate in college athletics so far. Elizabeth Matrazak signed at Alma to cheer, Evelyn Swantek to Oakland Community College to play softball, and then Carly Baryaktovich to play softball for Lehigh. So congratulations to those 3 students. We're just kind of getting ready for the holidays, so we have our holiday concerts coming up. Band is on December 9th and 10th, and then choir is on December 13th and 14th, and all of those are at 7 p.m. I believe the tickets are on sale now for both of those, both band and choir, but there's always room at the door as well. And then finally, our mock trial team is getting to go. We got our case this week, so we're getting it on Wednesday. We started early this year, so that's really exciting. And I also think it's important to mention that this year we are looking to go to the mock trial workshop. They offer this every year, but we never start this early, so we never get to go, but that's December 17th at Michigan State. And it's looking like a lot of us are going to get to go. And then on behalf of the whole mock trial team, I want to thank Mr. Edward for coming in. He's been volunteering his Wednesday nights to teach us a little bit about law and how everything actually works. So that's been really neat, and it definitely gives us an upper hand this year, so I'm excited. Oh, and then finally, I don't have a question this week, but I'm looking to go electronic with the question. I want to set up something with Google Forms and have like a whole school board thing on Twitter and everything. So that's my project right now that I'm going to be setting up, hopefully for next time.
Have you been working with Mr. Walmsley on his Twitter?
I haven't bugged him yet, but I'm about to.
Because I know that was something that you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. So that concludes my report.
Thank you. Okay, next, Superintendent Legislative Update.
As you heard from Haley, there's a lot of activities coming up in the next couple of weeks. I just want to add the elementary holiday concert is Wednesday, November 28th, I believe that is. 29th, excuse me, the 29th. It will be at Lee Elementary School, and then Haley talked about the high school, middle school concerts too. From a legislative update, the one that's pressing most school districts right now is the passage of Senate Bill, I'll get the number here for you, 584 through 586, which allows concealed weapons to be carried in schools. Right now, the way it was passed by the Senate is those individuals who obtained a special endorsement to having concealed weapons would be allowed to carry within schools, daycares, bars, arenas, churches, and libraries. It has not gone through the House process yet, or the signed by the governor, or so forth, so it's still I would encourage people to contact the senators to get their voice on whether guns should be allowed in school, in our case, schools. And last thing is the legislators will be on break for 2 weeks. So we'll have 2 weeks of nothing to report.
Great, thank you. Next, items of interest from board members. Anybody?
Just an observation, I don't see school board meetings scheduled after December for the projected.
Because we have an organizational meeting in January, we set those dates.
For all of 2018? Okay,
Uh-huh.
all right, thank you.
Mhm.
I was hoping maybe that.
Oh, that you weren't going to have any meetings? Yeah. No, you're not that lucky. Anybody else?
Had a chance to watch the play over the weekend. A very unique take on a play, 8 kind of individual scenes that revolve around love. And I think especially some of us older people can relate to at least one of the scenes, if not multiple, and some of them multiple times in life. So it was very well done. So great job, Haley. You were involved, but everybody did a great job.
Thank you. Yes,
And I
so-
just want to add, it was really a wonderful production, and they just did a stellar job.
So was our camera guy back there. He
Yeah,
was in it as
right
well.
back there. He was,
So-
and I told him
He
that I
did a
recognized
good
him
job
from the
too.
play.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did a good job. Yeah, and Mr. Simmons was chuckling at really interesting times sitting behind us, so it made you wonder. It was
Good
great.
stories.
It was great. Anybody else? Okay. Next, I'm looking for a motion to go into closed session for attorney-client communication.
So moved. Support.
It's been moved and supported by Chris. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We will go into closed session